This podcast is solely for the attention of institutional, professional, qualified, or sophisticated investors and distributors.
Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about inequality and climate change, which are, as we will see, two very interrelated megatrends. Before starting, we could simply recall that the trends in greenhouse gases emissions are not good. This is what the latest IPCC report indicated, and it is now clear that greenhouse gases emissions have risen very sharply after the sudden drop in global activity linked to the COVID crisis in 2020. And with regard to global warming, the World Meteorological Organization, a body of the United Nations, now estimate that there is a 50% probability that the global average temperature will reach 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels in at least one of the next 5 years. And according to its models, the probability that at least one of the 5 years between 2022 and 2026 will be the warmest on record is 93%. One of the big questions about this topic is how greenhouse gases emissions are distributed. Do some individuals emit more than others? We suspect that this is the case, but if so, which ones and in which proportions? And it turns out that the 2022 World Inequality Report, published by the Global Inequality Lab, devotes an entire chapter to carbon inequalities. These researchers try to determine the distribution of the carbon footprint of the world population according to the geographical areas and income levels. The first conclusion of this work is that there is a very large inequality with respect to emissions between individuals. On a global scale, 10% of the largest emitters are responsible for nearly 50% of emissions, while the bottom 50% of the distribution produces only 12%. 1% of the world population is responsible for 17% of emissions. These proportions recall that of income inequality at the global level, as 1% of the world population captures 19% of total income. The authors also looked at the dynamics of greenhouse gases emissions since 1990 by type of emitter. Since 1990, emissions per capita have increased by 7% globally, but they have increased by 26% for the 1% of the population that emits the most. For the 0.1% of the world population that emits the most, emissions per capita have increased by 45%. The report also highlights that there are large and persistent inequalities between continents. On average, human beings emit 6.6 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per capita and per year, but this hides huge inequalities between continents, since the emissions per capita and per year are 1.6 tons in sub-Saharan Africa, but 8.6 tons in East Asia, 9.7 tons in Europe, and 20.8 in North America. For North America, the emissions therefore correspond to 3 times the global average and are 6 times greater than what is necessary to limit global warming to 2 degrees. But the report goes further by showing that carbon inequalities within regions are greater than carbon inequalities between regions. In reality, as the authors of the report say, this inequality is not simply a matter between rich and poor countries. There are big emitters in poor countries and small emitters in rich countries. In Europe, the poorest half of the population emits around 5 tons of greenhouse gases per year and per capita. In East Asia, it emits about 3 tons, and in North America, about 10 tons. The contrast is striking with the emissions of the top 10% emitters in these regions, with 29 tons per year and per capita in Europe, 39 in East Asia, and 73 in North America. One of the elements underlined by the authors of the report is that the emissions of the poorest half of the population of the rich countries are already almost at the levels corresponding to the 2030 emissions target set by these countries, when these objectives are expressed by inhabitants. In the end, for the authors of the report, the scale of these carbon inequalities implies that climate policy should target well-off polluters more, and more generally, that climate policy should be better integrated with policies to reduce inequalities. Thank you for listening, and talk to you soon.
All comments and analysis reflect CPR AM views on market conditions and its evolution, according to information known at the time. As a result of the simplified nature of the information contained in this document, that information is necessarily partial and incomplete.